The unthinkable has finally happened in Belarus. After weeks of growing unrest and military unease, multiple army units have openly defected, refusing to follow orders from President Alexander Lukashenko's government. Reports from Minsk describe scenes of soldiers abandoning their posts, joining protesters, who in clashing with the loyalist security forces. It's chaos in the streets, with armored vehicles switching sides, gunfire echoing across the capital, and the once iron-fisted regime of Lukashenko seemingly collapsing from within. This is not just another protest, it's a revolution in real time. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Please subscribe and like my videos. Across Belarus, a nation long known as one of Europe's last true autocracies, the system that Lukashenko built over nearly 3 decades is unraveling faster than anyone thought possible. The trigger came earlier this week when footage began circulating online showing a battalion commander in the Belarusian army publicly refusing orders to suppress demonstrators in the city of Hudna. That single act of defiance, captured on video and shared millions of times, sparked a chain reaction across the country. Soldiers, tired of being used as instruments of political repression, started questioning their loyalty. Within 48 hours, several regional garrisons raised the national white-red-white flag, the historic banner of independent Belarus, signaling they were siding with the people, not the regime. Lukashenko, who once boasted that he controlled every lever of power from the army to the secret police, suddenly found himself isolated. Intelligence units loyal to him tried to crack down, but even parts of the internal security agency known as the KGB began splintering. Officers resigned en masse, claiming they could not fire on their own brothers and sisters. It's a stunning development that analysts say could mark the beginning of the end of Lukashenko's rule. But to understand how Belarus reached this breaking point, we need to rewind the clock. For nearly 30 years, Lukashenko maintained an authoritarian grip on power through a mix of fear propaganda and loyalty bought with Moscow support. His image, once that of a tough but stable leader, has been eroding since the fraudulent 2020 election when mass protests engulfed the country. Back then, the regime survived only because the army and police remained loyal. Thousands were jailed, beaten, or exiled. The opposition was crushed and Lukashenko reemerged bloodied but unbroken. Yet, deep beneath the surface, resentment grew among both civilians and within the military ranks. Years of economic stagnation, sanctions, and Lukashenko's increasingly erratic decisions, especially his subservience to the Kremlin, slowly poisoned the morale of the armed forces. Many officers saw how their country's independence was being sold to Moscow piece by piece. Joint exercises with Russia, the deployment of Russian troops on Belarusian soil, and Lukashenko's backing of Putin's invasion of Ukraine turned Belarus into a virtual satellite state that for many in uniform was the final betrayal. The current wave of defections reportedly began after Russian military advisors tried to assume command roles within several Belarusian units. Soldiers balked. They refused to take orders from foreign officers. One Belarusian colonel was quoted saying, "We pledged an oath to defend Belarus, not to become another region of Russia." Those words spread like wildfire. They ignited something deeper, a sense of national pride and identity that had been suppressed for decades. Now the streets of Minsk, Brest, and Vepsk are filled with demonstrators once again, but this time they're not alone. Video show soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder with civilians, forming human shields to protect unarmed protesters from riot police. Tanks bearing the old national flag patrol neighborhoods, not to intimidate, but to keep order and prevent chaos. The contrast couldn't be starker from 2020, when the same military was used as a blunt instrument of fear. Lukashenko's response has been frantic. He appeared on state television declaring that traitors will be crushed and accusing NATO and Western intelligence agencies of orchestrating the uprising. But even his words seemed hollow, his voice shaky. Sources claim his personal security detail has been reinforced by Russian operatives flown in from Minsk. Meanwhile, several top generals have reportedly gone missing, either defecting or being detained by loyalist forces. In the chaos, Moscow's silence speaks volumes. The Kremlin faces a dilemma. On one hand, Belarus is its key ally, a buffer state between Russia and NATO. On the other hand, sending troops to suppress Belarusians could ignite a full-scale conflict with unpredictable consequences. The last thing Putin needs, while already mired in the war in Ukraine, is another rebellion on his doorstep. Yet if Moscow does nothing, it risks losing Belarus entirely to a pro-democracy movement that could pivot toward the West. European leaders are watching events unfold with cautious optimism. In Brussels, emergency meetings have been held to discuss the situation. The EU has promised humanitarian aid and signaled support for a democratic transition. Poland and Lithuania have gone further, preparing contingency plans to assist Belarusian refugees and even offering sanctuary to defecting soldiers. NATO, while officially stating it has no plans to intervene, has increased surveillance flights along its eastern borders. The situation is fragile. One wrong move could trigger a wider confrontation between East and West. Inside Belarus, ordinary people describe a surreal mix of hope and fear. Some neighborhoods are celebrating, waving flags, and chanting for freedom, while others brace for the worst, expecting Lukashenko's loyalist security forces or Russian reinforcements to strike back. Internet connections have been disrupted across major cities, but underground networks continue to share footage of demonstrations and defection announcements. The sense on the ground is that the tide has turned irreversibly. Meanwhile, reports indicate that Lukashenko has relocated his command center from the presidential palace to a heavily fortified bunker outside Minsk. His movements are shrouded in secrecy, and rumors swirl that his family has already fled the country. Analysts note that this mirrors the final days of other collapsing regimes, from Ceausescu in Romania to Yanukovych in Ukraine. Once the military abandons a dictator, his power evaporates almost overnight. For the Belarusian people, this revolution feels like the culmination of decades of suppressed anger. They have endured censorship, police brutality, and economic decay, but they never gave up. Opposition leaders in exile are calling for unity, urging protesters to remain peaceful and avoid reprisals. Yet the question remains, what comes next? If the regime falls, Belarus faces an uncertain future. The country's economy is in ruins, heavily dependent on Russian subsidies. Its institutions are weak, hollowed out by decades of authoritarian control. There's no functioning parliament, no independent judiciary, and no trusted electoral system. Building a new democratic order will take years, if not decades. And looming over it all is the question of Russia. Will Putin allow a truly independent Belarus to emerge, or will he attempt to reassert control by force? Geopolitically, the stakes couldn't be higher. For the West, a democratic Belarus would represent a historic victory, a crack in the wall of authoritarianism that has long defined Eastern Europe. For Russia, it would be an existential blow, signaling the loss of a loyal ally and a potential domino effect across its sphere of influence. Already, Russian state media is calling the events in Belarus a Western-backed coup, trying to frame the narrative for domestic audiences. But the images flooding out of Minsk tell a different story. This is not a foreign plot. It's a grassroots uprising driven by Belarusians who have simply had enough. Experts warn, however, that revolutions are rarely clean. Power vacuums breed instability. Armed factions, political opportunists, and external players will all try to shape the outcome. Some defected officers have already formed an interim National Defense Council, claiming they will safeguard transition until civilian authority is restored. Their spokesperson announced that no foreign troops will be allowed to interfere with Belarusian sovereignty, a direct message to Moscow. At the same time, pro-regime loyalists still control parts of the state security apparatus, particularly the feared Oman riot police. Clashes between loyalists and defectors are being reported near military depots and air bases. The risk of escalation into full-blown civil conflict remains real. If that happens, Belarus could quickly turn into another frozen battlefield between East and West, something neither Europe nor Russia wants, but both may have to confront. In the information war, both sides are battling for control of the narrative. State TV continues to broadcast pre-recorded statements claiming order has been restored. Even as social media videos show fires, roadblocks, and jubilant crowds, the government's propaganda machine is faltering. More and more journalists from state outlets have resigned live on air, denouncing the regime's lies. One anchor, visibly emotional, declared, "I have been forced to read propaganda for years. Today, I stand with my people." That clip alone became symbolic of the entire revolution, a nation breaking free from fear. The international response grows stronger each hour. The United States has called for Lukashenko to step down immediately and allow free elections. The European Union is coordinating sanctions targeting regime insiders and freezing assets. Even China, traditionally a silent partner, has expressed concern about the situation, code for distancing itself from a sinking ship. On the streets, however, the revolution's heartbeat is not in foreign statements, but in the unity of its people. Miners on strike, students occupying campuses, factory workers marching through industrial towns all now share one slogan: "Long live Belarus." That cry, once dangerous to utter, now echoes freely across the country. Analysts predict that if the defection trend continues, the regime could fully collapse within days. Some sources claim that a group of senior officers has already opened secret talks with opposition figures abroad, preparing for a transitional government. The outline of a post-Lukashenko era is slowly emerging: constitutional reform, new elections, and a neutral foreign policy that keeps Belarus independent from both Moscow and NATO control. Yet uncertainty remains the dominant feeling. Revolutions often devour their own heroes, and the challenges ahead are immense. How to disarm remaining loyalist forces, how to rebuild trust in a system poisoned by decades of fear, and how to ensure that this revolution born from hope doesn't end in another cycle of corruption and chaos. For now, though, history is being written in the streets of Minsk. The people of Belarus, long silenced, long underestimated, have done what many thought impossible. They've broken the chains of fear. Soldiers have refused to be tools of oppression. The white-red-white flag, once banned, flies proudly once again over government buildings, schools, and even tanks. Each passing hour seems to push Lukashenko further into isolation, his once mighty security state crumbling like a sand castle in the tide. In the coming days, the world will watch to see whether Belarus completes its revolution peacefully or descends into turmoil. But one thing is already certain: the era of Lukashenko's unquestioned rule is over. The illusion of control has shattered. The people have spoken, and even the army, his final pillar of power, has chosen to stand with them. In history books, there will be a line marking this moment: the day when fear died in Belarus and freedom took its first breath in a generation. Whatever happens next, the spark that's been lit cannot be extinguished. A nation once trapped between East and West has rediscovered its own voice, its own destiny.